Hello, back talking again about Kafka, because why not? I was planning to have a goal, I was trying to have a goal of making one of these a week, but I've just got very busy with uni recently, so yeah, that sort of takes priority. I think I'm going to title this video something like, when does the correct interpretation of art become important? If I can fit it into the title, because I can only have 200 characters. And I'm talking about Metamorphosis with this idea of when is the correct interpretation of something important, because it's his most famous work. Quite accessible, but then looking at the themes and whether or not people would actually pick up on them, that's what I'm going to be talking about today. So starting off with the writing, it's, again, Kafka's writing really shocked me. If you watched my last video about The Judgment, that short story, then you'll know that I sort of said, comparatively to Camus at least, it's a lot more vivid and a lot less detached, and like everyone describes Kafka as like a philosopher. And so going into his books, and short stories, I didn't think his like actual writing and prose and dialogue would be all that good, but it is. Yeah, I mean, the descriptions of how Gregor feels when he wakes up as a giant insect, and how like disgusting and vivid all those things are. Yeah, wow, this is like, parts of this book are horror, really, I thought. I don't know if other people consider it a horror. I've not really researched that. But yeah, interesting idea of having an own character be disgusted and making the protagonist the horrific sort of creature, I guess. Yeah, not too dissimilar to Frankenstein, I suppose. Well, no, I've not made notes for this one. I just sort of read it, and then literally 5 minutes ago I just made bullet points of things I'd want to talk about. So starting off with Kafka's obsession with family dynamics and fathers as well. I did some research on Metamorphosis and Kafka generally after reading this, and something that popped up a few times was his obsession with not fathers generally, but like the family unit, and what role does a dad play in that. And it's clear from reading both this and The Judgment, his like completed works that I've finished reading, it just pops up again and again. It's less obvious in this than The Judgment, but it's still there. I mean, the way his dad treats Gregor after he turns into this giant insect, it's quite, even if one of my children one day turns into a giant insect, I'd like to think I took better care of them than Gregor's dad did, but, the next thing I wanted to mention, I'm getting through these quickly, is the theme of isolation. So obviously, Gregor gets turned into this giant beetle, and then he's sort of outcast from the rest of his family. He gets called names by like the housekeeper, and he gets like moldy bits of food. I mean, he enjoys moldy bits of food, to be fair, because he's a giant insect now. There was an interesting part in the story where his family is sort of making adjustments for him, like by moving away the furniture so he can like crawl on so he can crawl on the walls and the ceiling, and live his happy beetle life, I suppose. But his mum and his sister have an argument, saying things along the lines of, is it more humane to try and keep him the way he was, like as this like human person by keeping all his old remains in his room, or do we just embrace the fact that he's not the same person anymore? And that's sort of going on to a different theme than isolation, but I just thought I'd mention that as well as another interesting idea, something that stood out to me as well. But the reason I wrote down isolation is, well, a few things really, but the first one is I feel like Kafka captures so well what I imagine being any sort of like being part of any marginalized group, or if you're like on any level ostracized from society, whether that's being like picked on in a group of friends or, you know, wider like political and social issues. Like, I don't know, I'm in the UK, and our government's current treatment of immigrants and trans people and you know, so many groups. Yeah, what was my point? Yeah, Kafka captures this really well, this idea of isolation and what that does to your psyche. Because Gregor starts the book as this giant insect, and he doesn't really describe himself. He describes himself in a very objective way, and whether that's him dealing with what's just happened to him, or whether he doesn't view himself as just, I mean, he's disturbed, but there's a difference between how he describes himself and how his family perceive him and then describe him, if that makes sense. So whether or not it's like almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy, I'm not sure, but there's definitely a theme of how others view you is how you view yourself. You know, he just gets told how disgusting he is, no one wants to look at him, he has to cover himself in a blanket whenever anyone enters the room, and even then no one comes in, his sister does, which is something I'll get onto later. But yeah, isolation. And the other thing I wanted to talk about with like isolation is, I'd argue that this, I mean, not the whole thing, because Metamorphosis is only 85 pages of this. Metamorphosis is a better looked at the effects of isolation, and obviously I'm recording this in 2024. COVID has only just recently stopped being as big of a thing as it was a few years ago. I'd say that what Gregor goes through in this book is similar to what a lot of us went through in pandemic times. Obviously not literally, none of us turned into giant insects, unless you did, and leave a comment, I'd like to hear about it. But I'd say for most people, for me anyway, I thought this was a better look at the effects of isolation on individuals than the plague was that I recently talked about by Camus. Yeah. And then the last thing to talk about, this is a lot shorter than the rest of my videos, but I think I'm gonna start bullet pointing things instead of making like long notes, because it seems to be going better. Oh, I missed something off the list. So I said I was going to talk about his sister. So there's two big sort of metamorphoses. I don't know what the plural of metamorphosis is. That's a tongue twister. So Gregor's change versus Greta. I don't know, it's German, so I'm going to assume it's Greta, but it's spelled with an E on the end, so not sure. Sorry if your name is Greta and I've just mispronounced it. Gregor's change is very all-consuming. A literal change of species, you know, incomparable to any other change that probably anyone could realistically go through. So it's sort of hard to focus on anything else, and I think this was Kafka's intention, that Gregor changes very instantly. Greta changes as well throughout the book in a more like holistic way. You know, she doesn't change species or anything that's like impossible like Gregor does, but her actual character traits start as like quite feeble, quite withdrawn, until she has to take action and responsibility for her brother, her older brother. And by the end, she's like matured into a young woman that her parents also view differently now, because of the shared experience of having to care for an insect's brother. And this is something I've not written this down, but I think it's something that kind of made me reflect, because when you're, well, at least for me, like I'd say from the age of like 16 to 20, it's quite easy to, or even past 20, it's quite easy to focus on yourself and how things are impacting you. You know, there's like so much stuff going on in the world and like personal relationships as well. It's hard to think about all that and what kind of person am I, and then also the people around you. How has this shared experience even affected someone else? I mean, it's hard to figure out how something affects you. Like 100% know what it did to you, whether that's grief or like a friendship ending or a friendship starting. You know, things affect us all differently. So knowing how something's affected someone else as well, it's like, wow, how am I supposed to do that? And especially younger siblings. I've got one younger brother. So if you're watching this, Charlie, hello. But, you know, going through shared experiences and, or even not, it's like a sudden thing where I realised recently, wow, you know, my younger brother's turning 18 this year. I was like 18 2 minutes ago. I'm turning 21 soon. You know, we've not got that much of an age difference, and the point isn't age, it's seeing younger people around you, family, friends, like suddenly mature. And it's not just younger people maturing, it's anyone that you know, like developing and changing their opinions, their views, their characteristics. It's something that's hard to spot until it suddenly jumps out at you in a certain way. In any way, really. I hope that makes sense. So yeah, keep a eye out on your loved ones and any changes that they're going through, I suppose, is what I'm trying to say, I think. So the last thing, and this, I don't know how long this is going to take, the title of this video, when is the correct interpretation of art important? I wanted to start off this sort of ending segment with asking this question. Has anyone ever read a book, watched a movie, listened to music and not had any prior knowledge, and then you read something about it on the internet and you're like, oh, it all makes a lot more sense now? Or, for example, the example I was thinking of is doing Lord of the Flies in school without having any sort of like prior knowledge or, yeah, any prior knowledge. How many people would pick up on the characters that represent Freud's superego, ego and id. You know, unless you've just been studying Freud in uni or in school or whatever, I doubt many people would think, oh yeah, that makes sense. Like just immediately off the bat, jump to that conclusion. And the same thing with this book, really. Metamorphosis, at least. Again, not the whole thing. The things that I picked up on that I talked about in this video was isolation. The effects of isolation. I did not notice Greta's transformation as well, and I just sort of said that that was the point. But, you know, when you're reading a book, how many people think, oh yeah, I've definitely got the message of this right, and then you look it up and it's something different to what you thought. And I'm not talking about like quite literal books that don't have like long extended metaphors like Metamorphosis does. Like, I'm trying to think of an example, like reading Jane Eyre or The Picture of Dorian Gray even. You know, that has a lot of metaphors in it, but it's quite obvious what the point is when it's like, this is like a different sort of level where everything's like a symbol for something. Another example, I recently watched, what's it called? Is it called No Country for Old Men, the Coen brothers film? Or am I combining two different movie titles? I'm not sure. I'll leave a comment after I've recorded this. And I was like, I enjoyed it, I loved it. So, you know, I do what I normally do. I went in, looked it up on the internet afterwards, seeing what other people thought about it. I always go to the themes section on Wikipedia because I'm a really fun, interesting person like that. And the things I didn't pick up on were like, you know, the theme of fate. How many people watched that film and thought, oh yeah, this is about fate? I'd probably bet a bit of money, not many people. So what I wanted to ask really is, when is the correct interpretation of art important? Obviously in an academic setting, if you studied English Lit, then it's probably a lot easier to pick up on things like that. Loads of sirens are going off outside my flat right now. I hope you can't hear that. Okay, I think it's probably all right to start talking again now. Yeah, unless you do pick up on themes really easily, I don't know, maybe I'm just bad at picking up on them. But the point I was trying to make, and I've been trying to make, is if you're reading something, is the correct interpretation of the message that important? Unless you're in an academic setting and you're like talking about, and you're writing a thesis on something, probably not. I'm making sort of informal YouTube videos that hopefully people will watch and hopefully inspires people to read, because I think the themes of a book are like the most interesting things about it. I'm not too fussed about the writing techniques on the same level as like themes and atmosphere. Atmosphere is a writing technique, but you know, the point is, without like a lot of prior knowledge, things won't be that obvious. So if you're reading a book and you're like, oh, I didn't really get that, don't really beat yourself up about it. I've read quite a few books at this point, before I started my channel as well, and I've not always picked up on things. Same with movies. So yeah, the point is this: read Metamorphosis because it's great. This whole book's very good so far. And if you don't pick up on themes of books straight away, it doesn't really matter. I think it's maybe just a me thing, this. I was just about to end the video there, but maybe it's just a me thing where I'm like disappointed where I don't pick up on something straight away. But yeah, it's something that you learn that you just won't, because different cultures, different time periods, different settings of the book themselves, so many things will change how you think of a book and how it was written as well. So yeah, read books because it's a great hobby to have, and don't stress if you don't pick up on something. It doesn't mean you're not smart. It just means that, you know, it'll click into place after you read up on it. And even then you don't have to read up on things. But yeah, Kafka Metamorphosis, great book. Go and read it. I think that's everything I wanted to say.